Welcome back to Weems Motor Co. Let's get a bottom end together. Stick around. Well, last time we were here, we were breaking down that engine, a 1971 Triumph Bonneville 650 engine, and we got it all the way broke down to the crankshaft, and we were going to be utilizing a lot of these parts to get an engine together for a bike that we have titled the Jury, which we have the engine cases right here and the frame right there, which is going to be a factory rigid Triumph motorcycle. Now, basically all we have to work with is only the items that we have in shop on hand. We cannot order anything online. We can't run down to a parts store and grab a tub of grease. We have to use everything that we have in-house. Now, after breaking down that 1971 engine that you guys watched in the last video, if you didn't catch that, make sure you jump back and watch that. We've discovered there's not a whole lot in there that we could actually use because the conditions of things and mix match parts and things missing. So that forces us to scrounge even further. So a few videos back, you watched us go to our back porch and pull out this 1960 Bonneville engine and quickly discovered that it needed a lot of things. It needed a whole top end in it. So since then, we've taken the opportunity to break down the engine all the way down to splitting the cases and cleaning the parts. Well, what we discovered was not as bad as what we thought. So when we're pulling the thing apart, it was coming apart really easily, and I started noticing that there was assembly lube over all of the internal parts, the cams, the cam gears, the crank bearings, everything. So my thought is that somebody had built the bottom end of this engine and never ran it. So what is good was we took it all the way down to the crankshaft, which we have here on the vise, and went ahead and pulled that sludge trap out and discovered that it was absolutely clean inside. The crank bearings were in amazing shape. Everything was great about it. It had just been sitting with the top end off of it for, gosh, at least probably 40 years. So what we're going to do is we are going to utilize that crank and the rods and the rod bearings and the engine bearings, all of that stuff inside, even the cams, and use that to build this engine. Now, you're saying, Weems, what's up with your voice? Well, I've been down for the count for a few days, got a little sickness. Now is the first day we're back in the shop, able to make things happen. So what we're gonna do today is we're gonna get this bottom end for the motorcycle that we've called the Jury together, get it into the frame, which means we are going to have to source some things. We need a magneto that actually works. We need to find all of the engine plates, which are the front and the rear engine plates, and all of the hardware that hold those on, which means we got to go digging through some pieces and parts, maybe find a bike out back or at the storage. I don't know what I got to do. I've got to find all of those things so that we can get this together. But the first thing is we need to get the surfaces ready and prepped. We've already cleaned it. We just need to make sure that the gasket surfaces are nice and clean so we can get this back together. So let's knock that out first. So the goal of this video is to get that bottom end together and get it into the frame. And like I was saying earlier, when we removed that engine from the bike on our back porch, we discovered it did not have a top end on it, which means that all of those studs that we just removed from the engine that hold the top end on did not have any nuts on there. So what we want to do right now while we have these removed is go ahead and clean the threads up on these. We'll jump back there on the wire wheel, just hit them really quickly, clean those threads up, and we'll dig into our bucket full of old Whitworth nuts to be able to find 8 of those to be able to put the cylinder on our next episode when we do the top end. So really important, we've talked about it before, Before 1968, Triumph used what was called Whitworth threads. It's not a metric, it's not a standard, it was their own proprietary tooling where you had to have your wrenches, and all of the taps and dies were all different. You just can't go to a hardware store and pick up a nut or a bolt for Whitworth. So I have to dig through my box of Whitworth stuff and see if I can find 8 of these nuts. Before that, let's go ahead and clean these threads. Threads all nice and cleaned up. Now you're asking yourself, why do you use a wire wheel? I could have simply went over and dropped them in a parts tumbler and they would have came out immaculate and beautiful. But the reason I like to use a wire wheel is because as I'm turning, I'm able to inspect each and every thread that is on bolts or studs. Studs in this case are cylinder-based studs, and I did discover that we have this one stud that has some pretty boogered up threads on it. Well, I have tons of these old bins that I've just taken apart old engines, and when I've replaced or rebuilt or put new on, I throw the old ones in because you never know when you need to find that old part. So we're gonna dig through these bins, see if I can find a replacement stud, and while we're at it, we'll just go ahead and see if we can find 8 cylinder-based nuts that are a Whitworth thread for these studs. So let's start to dig it. When it comes to digging through old bins of old parts, it really helps to have years of experience and a manual on hand to know exactly what you are looking at. Well, I just so happen to know, because I've worked on so many of these bikes, is that the nuts that go on the cylinder-based studs that are on the outside of the engines have a larger outside diameter than the ones on the inside. So I was lucky enough to find us 4 of the small diameter ones and 4 of the larger diameter ones in our bin of nuts. Now, I did notice when we were taking those engine cases and cleaning up the gasket surface that I was missing one of our dowel inserts. Well, happened to find another one in one of my bins. And that being said, I just wanted to take quick note that there are 2 different style of studs that go on the cylinder. You're gonna find ones that have this little groove around the outside. Now, there are only 2 of these, and the rest of the other 6 do not have that. These ones with the groove are the ones that have the dowels that go on them and index the cylinder properly. So, want to make sure you have all the right pieces and parts when it comes to putting these things together, or else you're going to have a monstrosity like that 1971 Bonneville that we tore down in the last video. So I'm going to wire brush these up, get them all cleaned up, ready to go back together, and we can start getting over to the crankshaft. So even though we are using old used parts, we want to make sure that we are keeping everything as clean as possible. Like, we cleaned the crankshaft, we made sure that sludge trap was flushed with brake clean and everything like that. We want to make sure everything is clean. Now, like I said, we're using all old parts because I don't have stuff on the shelf to use, like rod bearings. So these are the original rod bearings off of the rods that was originally in this 1960 Bonneville engine. Now, I took the rods over to the bead blaster, bead blasted those up, got them super clean, checked the bushings, made sure they fit good with the wrist pins, and everything slides nice and smoothly as it should. Now, typically you would not reuse rod bearings when you're putting the engines back together, but like I said, I think this engine had never been run before, and these things look like they are in really great shape. So we're just gonna keep everything clean, lubricate everything properly, get these rods back onto the crankshaft so we can get this crankshaft into the engine cases. All right, let's get to work. Now that crankshaft's all ready to go into the cases, we have to find the bolts, the studs, all of the things that will hold those 2 cases together when we put that crankshaft in there. So we want to make sure everything is on hand before we start doing things, because the last thing we want to do is to get ourselves in a situation where we just don't have the stuff. So compiled a list from our manual of the bolts and the studs that we need. Now we just need to get back into our bins, dig through, see if we can find some good stuff to use, and continue working. Let's find these bolts. It seems finding the hardware for these old rigid pre-units ends up being the hardest part that takes the longest time, but we did find all of our studs and nuts and washers and things to get those engine cases together and get them in the frame. Now the last thing to do is to go on the back porch, grab my milk crate full of pre-unit Triumph engine plates, gearbox plates, all kinds of stuff in that thing, maybe some foot pegs or something. Go out there, grab it, bring it in here, dig through that box, and see if we can find all the plates we need to get this thing together. Let's go grab it. So digging through our milk crate full of old engine plates and stuff, we were able to locate a set of foot pegs, which are actually in really great shape. Kind of too nice for what we're doing, but you got to use what we got. We got a set of gearbox plates and gearbox adjusters. I got some rear engine plates, and we got a set of front engine plates. Now, we did find some nice chrome stuff in the box, but I was like, I'm wanting to keep this thing a little crusty, so we're decided to go with the chipped up old crusty paint. So we got everything we need. Now we can get the bearings that have been getting cold in the freezer, get the cases heated up, get those bearings in there so we can get that crankshaft into the cases along with the camshafts. All right, time to get clean and get these things together. When you heat up those cases and you freeze those bearings, they go in like butter, like they were meant to be together. Now that these have cooled down, we can load in the crankshaft, we can load in the intake cam breather and the cams, and then we can get our sealant on here and get ready to put these two case halves together. So let's get the crankshaft in. Everything going in great. Got the cams in there, got everything ready to go. Now we're going to use our gasket sealer. I like to use this MotoSeal gasket maker. It's fuel resistant and it's made by Permatex, but when you put this on here, you only got just a brief amount of time before it starts to set. So you need to make sure that you have all of your hardware laid out. Everything's in position so you can get this torque down before that gasket sealer starts setting. So now we're going to apply this on here, get the tops of the cams and the bushings and all that stuff lubed up for that upper portion, and then slide it on home and then start that tightening sequence. We're going to knock this out in one take. Let's get it going. Maybe I shouldn't work on motors whenever I'm on cold medicine. Well, maybe somebody watching this video has already noticed what I did wrong, but I noticed it right before I put it into the frame, and that was I put the crankshaft in backwards. The primary side of the crank is coming out on the timing side. Yeah, I have to say this is the first time that's ever happened. Oh well, split the cases again, just flip the crank around, get it right, get it into the frame. Let's do it. Crisis diverted, wrapped it up. Now, let's get this engine thrown into the chassis. And there you have it, folks. Bottom and into the frame of the Jury. Excited about it. Next time we're going to be working on the top end and possibly figuring out something for that gearbox, but we thank you for hanging out. It's been a wild ride so far, and it's only going to get better from here. With that, if you are new around here, jump down and hit that subscribe button. If you really like the video, hit that thumbs up, turn those notifications on, and let everyone know what's going on right here at Weems Motor Co. Peace.